Hello and welcome back. I'm Dr. DiNezza, and in this video we're going to be talking about the top root causes of constipation. But before we do, shouldn't we talk for just a second about what constipation actually is? You would be surprised how many people suffer from constipation and they don't even label it as such. They don't even realize it. So the classic thing that comes to mind for a lot of us when we think of constipation is that we're not pooping enough. Generally speaking, most people should be having 1 or 2 poops per day. If you have a third bonus poop and it's of good quality, more power to you. But if you're any less frequent or more frequent than that range, it's probably outside of the norm. So if you're not having 1 poop a day, that's what usually gets labeled as constipation. But then there are other varying forms of constipation that don't always get picked up. So for example, if you have a poop every day, but it's really, really difficult or painful to pass, that could still be constipation. If you have a poop every day, but it's dry and hard, like these little rabbit turds at the end of the Bristol stool scale, that's still constipation. And if you feel like you're not getting it all out and there's still something left in your bowel, that is still constipation. So don't be fooled. Even if you're having 1 poop a day, you might still be constipated. Good thing we're going to talk about why in this video. Now, if you know me, you know I'm a sucker for the science and a sucker for the mechanism. Because if we understand what's happening, we can reverse engineer and we can come up with solutions. So right out the gate, I want to conceptualize constipation and more broadly motility problems. So we could even lump SIBO under this umbrella if we wanted to. We're going to conceptualize this almost like a flowing river, right? So the water is coming in from one end. The drink, the food that you're eating, in this case, is coming in one end, goes through the esophagus, then the stomach, the small intestine, the colon, and then finally out the anus. And we want the flow of our digestive tract to move in one direction and at the appropriate pace. And it's not unlike an actual river. So let's see. So here's a river for us, and we'll make it, bigger and smaller in some areas. And in this case, the food and drink is going to be like the water coming into this river system. So let's say from an underground spring or a mountain. And then in this case, the stool that we're evacuating or whatever's leaving the system, well, that's going to be analogous to the water that's ending up out of the river system and getting dumped into the ocean. So what would we expect would affect this system and impede the flow of the water? The obvious one is a dam, right? If somebody put a dam, whether it's man-made or beaver-made or otherwise, if there's an actual blockage, that's going to impede the flow of the water out the other side of that dam, right? So that one's easy. But what if there are parts of this river system where the water is really, really fast and then parts where it's really, really slow? Now, that might not do anything bad to an actual real river, but for your digestive system, if you have really, really strong, really fast motility in one area and really slow in the other area, that could impede the flow of things and make things real weird. So that's a consideration, is like disjointed motility, I guess. Or you could just have a slow flowing river just in general, right? The whole thing just might be globally slow. So think about it this way when you're thinking about root causes of constipation. Think of it in the framework of, well, what would impede the flow of this river? And what would impede the flow of contents through the digestive system? Now, that being said, I think the easiest place for us to start is working from the top down. So thinking about the quantity and quality of water entering this river system. So the easiest one to start with is actually water. You would be surprised how many people suffer from mild to moderate constipation and they're just dehydrated. This is easy enough. Just go and Google right now. There should be a quick formula on Google. How much water do you need in a day? Factor in things like caffeine that can dehydrate you, but just do a quick rough and dirty Google search. See how much liquid you need per day and then compare that to how much you have been drinking. If you're underhydrated or blatantly dehydrated, that actually might be why you're suffering from constipation. And then, maybe the solution becomes you just carry a water bottle with you at all times. I lived in the desert once, so this comes with me everywhere I go, but it's maybe not that intuitive for a lot of other people. So just make sure you're hydrated. Make sure there's literally water coming into the river system. Now, The next place that we need to look, again, thinking about what's coming into the river system, is obviously your food, right? What are you eating for your meals and your snacks each day? And there's a lot of different things that we could cover as far as food in relation to constipation. The big one that's probably the most famous and I think arguably the most important is going to be fiber. And there's a little bit of context to this conversation. So we're going to pause here in a second, but let me just write these down. So under the food umbrella, we could think about things like fiber. We could think about something like saturated fat intake, sat fat, dairy. And then we could include kind of like a miscellaneous category of sorts, and we'll get to that in a minute. And this is probably a really good framework to start out the question of nutrition as it pertains to constipation. Now, let's pause for a moment on the fiber piece, because right now, this is a little bit controversial. All our lives, we have been inundated with information from the medical community and the health and the nutrition industry saying that fiber is like the blessed nutrient and we need more fiber. And if we just get more fiber, then that's going to fluff up our poops, moisten our poops, and that will cure constipation. And I think that honestly, largely that is still going to be true for a lot of people. I think when you're looking at nutrition for constipation, the first question you should be asking yourself is, am I getting enough fiber? So look at the RDA for your sex. For women, it's 25 grams per day. Men, I think it's 38. And just, add them up. Use something like Chronometer, which is a free nutrition tracking app, and just see, are you hitting the amount of fiber that you should be eating in a day? If the answer is no, that's a great nutritional target that you can work on, and give that at least a couple months and see if that doesn't remedy your constipation. I find that for the vast majority of people I've worked with, yes, including IBS, yes, including SIBO, increasing fiber usually is the ticket for constipation. But I said the majority, not all, right? I do think that there's a little bit of room for a conversation where some people need to actually reduce dietary fiber to remedy something like constipation or bloating. Now, the most overt cases of this tends to be vegans and vegetarians, particularly vegans. I have seen vegan clients, and I know my podcast co-host Amy has seen vegan clients where they are getting an astronomical amount of fiber per day, and they're backed up and they're constipated and they're bloated and they don't know why. And we kind of come in and say, hey, why don't we reduce? Maybe you don't need to be hitting 200 or 250% of your daily value of fiber. Maybe you could throttle it back and get closer to the daily recommended value and be okay there. So I think that there are people out there who are genuinely overshooting fiber, and it is causing constipation and bloating. I don't know how common that is because frankly, we have only been interested in lower fiber diet and low carbohydrate diets for a relatively short amount of time, and we don't have a ton of good quality studies on this topic, but I do think it probably happens, and it's something that you might want to examine if increasing your fiber doesn't do the trick for you. So there's probably a sweet spot for each individual person. Now, moving past the fiber conversation, we can get into something like saturated fat. And there is actually a little bit of information. The carnivore people are going to have my head for this one, but there is some information out there that suggests that higher saturated fat diets are associated with constipation. Now, the context of that is probably really important, right? A high saturated fat diet, but it's coming from good quality meat versus something like McDonald's, you can't even compare those two worlds. So whether or not we could really blame the saturated fat versus the overall quality of the diet, I think is up for grabs. But there is a little bit of evidence. I'll link one of the papers down below in the description. There's some evidence that saturated fat could play a role too. Now, dairy is another one. This has been studied predominantly in children, but I have seen it for some patients, and I've seen it in myself years ago, that increasing dairy can lead to constipation for some people. Now again, is this because of an immune activation, like food sensitivity, food allergy kind of a thing, or is there something intrinsic to dairy that does this? I don't know. I do know, I will say, my grandmother, years and years ago, right? She was born in 1924, for crying out loud. So she didn't read PubMed. She didn't know any of this microbiome stuff. My grandmother always said that cheese and dairy binds you up. And she also always observed that you shouldn't eat sugar or dairy when you're sick because it causes phlegm. Again, this woman didn't have access to PubMed. And if she did, she didn't know that she had access to it. She never read a research paper in her life that I'm aware of, but we had this traditional knowledge that was passed down through the generations that was largely accurate. And dairy is one of these things that is known to cause phlegm and stagnation, and that could easily be causing some blockage in this river pathway. So if you're a really big consumer of dairy, that might be something to address too. And then last but not least, like I said, there's a miscellaneous category when it comes to nutrition, and that's going to be things like coffee. Now, I don't think that constipated people have a coffee deficiency per se, but coffee can be something that is health promoting in low or moderate amounts, cup or two a day. It has polyphenols, it has antioxidants, it is good for the microbiome in low to moderate amounts. And if you happen to enjoy coffee, I don't, but if you are one of these people who likes the bean juice, it could be that incorporating this into your diet is something that facilitates motility and helps you have your bowel movement every day. And again, I don't know if you are constipated because of a coffee deficiency, but that seems like largely a win-win to me. So I thought it was worth mentioning anyhow. Now, so again, this is all the stuff coming into the river system. So this would be food and drink related here. But what about other root causes, right? There are other things other than what we put in our mouth that could affect the flow of this river. So one really common one that probably a fair amount of people are already aware of is going to be hypothyroidism. Now, I think that probably if you are at the point where you are constipated from hypothyroidism, my guess is that you would have already identified that with routine blood work, but I figured it was worth mentioning. If you haven't gotten your thyroid tested in the last, say, year of your life, or if it was kind of so-so, like, above 3.0, I would say in recent testing, I would go ahead and just check in on the thyroid again and see if that's related, because that is one of many symptoms of hypothyroidism. Also, I will say sleep and circadian rhythm disruption. Mostly this is going to come up in the form of jet lag and travel to different time zones, but circadian rhythm disruption is very, very, very much associated with constipation in particular. I would even put a bracket under there that I bet if you eat your meals at weird, squirrely, erratic times during the day, that probably also would cause constipation, but I think that's probably less documented, at least from what I've seen. Also, pregnancy is another notorious cause of constipation. Now again, how much of that is because of like the baby pressing down and causing problems with the pelvic floor versus the hormones versus whatever else, that's up for grabs. But pregnancy-induced constipation is a very real thing. Pelvic floor dysfunction, as I kind of alluded to there, is another one. Pelvic floor dysfunction is really, really common. I've referred a lot of my patients to pelvic floor PT, particularly with biofeedback, and it's been helpful. You see this a lot in women, especially because some of the risk factors are sports like cheerleading and gymnastics, and pregnancy and childbirth, because we are not only having a baby press down on our pelvic floor and weaken it for 9 or 10 months, but also you're passing a melon-sized baby through the pelvic floor when you have a child. So women in particular, but I have seen men who benefit highly from pelvic floor PT as well, so don't rule this out if you're a dude. Also, just physical exercise. This one's also kind of related to the pelvic floor conversation. Exercise is really well known to impact constipation and improve constipation symptoms. In particular, it's hypothesized that working on the core and the pelvic floor and like the hips and the musculature in and around the pelvic floor is most important for this, so that you have the strength and the stamina to actually contract it and squeeze things out. But I think exercise just in general is helpful for constipation. I know I have found that to be true for myself and for patients. And then last but not least, at least for the purpose of this video, I wanted to mention that there are a lot of medications that cause constipation as a well-known side effect. So for example, I had a student in FODMAP Freedom, and she came to FODMAP Freedom because she wanted to address constipation. But then it came out that she poops totally normally on her own if she's not taking her migraine medication. But she had such a bad battle with migraines that she was on a preventative medication every single day. Well, so that means that for her, the treatment of the constipation wound up being that we had to focus more of our effort on the migraine and healing that and getting that underway versus doing things to directly aid the constipation, right? So it's like getting to the root of the root of the root, so to speak. Constipation wasn't something we needed to work on for her. That would have just been a Band-Aid. We had to get to the reason why she was constipated. And again, medications, there are many of them, but medications can be a really, really big causative factor for this. I'll put a note in the description of just a handful. So things like antidepressants, anticholinergics, antacids, PPIs, migraine medications, opioids, which are painkillers. The list is actually really, really long. And if you're on any sort of medications, particularly prescription, I would recommend that you go to Google and type in the name of your medication and side effect and see what pops up. And then you could also go to Google and type in the name of your medication and constipation and see if that pops up. But you might be surprised to see that you've been spinning your wheels because you're just dealing with a side effect of a medication and you need to target something else entirely rather than focusing on the constipation. As you can tell, there is an art and a science to this. And I like to think I do a good job sharing the science side of it here on YouTube, but the art is a little harder to communicate, right? Like, how do we figure out if you are a person who needs more fiber or less? Or heck, quantity aside, what if it's the type of fiber you're consuming? We didn't even get into that can of worms. We didn't get into soluble versus insoluble, FODMAPs, and all of this conversation. But this is kind of my point. I can try to share as much as I can here on YouTube and share the science and the how, but figuring out what you need as an individual is much harder to do in this type of format. So if you're feeling a little bit lost, a little bit stuck, poop pun always intended, by the way, and if you're feeling like you need more guidance and support to figure out your side of the equation, I'd encourage you to check out FODMAP Freedom in 90 days. So I'll put the link in the description below. FODMAP Freedom is my group coaching program where we lead you through a step-by-step guide of what to do and when, the hierarchy of what you need to focus on, and we do a lot of coaching and a lot of support to help get you there and help you figure out the individuality side of this. So again, are you somebody who needs more fiber or less? It's hard for me to tell you here on YouTube, but if I get to know you and get to know your case and I meet with you in Q&As and we get to build a rapport over the next few months, I can usually help you decide whether that is relevant for you or not. Right now, we have 4 live Q&As for this current session of FODMAP Freedom. We have 2 Q&As every week with a nutritionist who works for me and 2 live Q&As with me. And then we also have a support email, so if for whatever reason you can't attend the Q&As, you could always email in your questions for support. But if you're feeling like you need that support and that guidance and that structure, come over and check out FODMAP Freedom. I literally guarantee it will change your poops and change your life. And if I'm wrong, I'll give you your money back. Hey guys, if you like this video, be sure to subscribe, ring the bell, click the like button, and leave a comment down below with the videos that you would like to see me do next. Doing all of those really helps support the channel and support my efforts in making as many videos as possible for you guys. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next video.